There we go. Yeah. So I grew up Baptist. We didn't really do Lent, and it's been something new that I've been growing into. But it snuck up on me this year, and I forgot to give something up. And I was feeling really guilty about that because there's this voice in my head that always tells me that, if I don't do all these things, that, somehow I'm a failure or God's going to be angry at me. And I think a lot of us live with those voices in our head. And my friend Gavin actually gave me this. He told me about it this week, and I couldn't find it for the first service. But the words of Pope Francis about Lent. And he said, "Do you want to fast this Lent? Fast from hurting words and say kind things. Fast from sadness and be filled with gratitude. Fast from anger and be filled with patience. Fast from pessimism and be filled with hope. Fast from worries and trust God. Fast from complaints and contemplate simplicity. Fast from pressures and be prayerful. Fast from bitterness and fill your heart with joy. Fast from selfishness and be compassionate to others. Fast from grudges and be reconciled. Fast from words and be silent so you can listen." And that just really echoed in me and really reflected this series that we're doing over the rest of this month called Letting Go. Now, first of all, I'm going to put people's worries aside. I will not be singing Disney songs during this message. I can't promise future weeks, but I fear not, I am not going to be singing Letting Go today. But we are going to talk about, over this next month, things to let go of our life. And today I want to talk about letting go for fear. Fear is one of those insidious things. Sometimes it's really obvious, sometimes it's really subtle, but so much of our life can be controlled by fear. And sometimes those fears can become so powerful that they're actually diagnosable as phobias. Now, I don't know if you know this, I actually have a diagnosed phobia, and it is, come on, fear that the remote will not work. Okay, so my fear is gephyrophobia, which is the fear of bridges. I got stuck once on top of the Burlington Skyway, and it was terrifying, and I was stuck up there for almost an hour, and ever since then, I will not drive over it. I will do whatever I have to go out of the way. I will, there's that little lift bridge beside it. I get off and take that. It adds 10 minutes to my commute, well worth it. But my fear got so bad, actually, that it was not just, first it was the Burlington Skyway, then I was afraid of the gardener, then I kept avoiding that, and I got afraid of even little things like dropping people off at the airport, because that's a raised thing. Then it became, I couldn't drive over the bridge on the Don Valley on the 401, and then one day I found myself so afraid that I couldn't actually, I was driving at night and I started having a panic attack in case there was secretly a bridge ahead of me in the dark on my ride home from work that I didn't remember. And that was when I'm like, wow, fear is really controlling my life. I'll talk more about that as we go through the sermon, but that's a fear. It's a real thing. Here's some other fun names of phobias that are out there. Trypophobia, the fear of holes. That would make Swiss cheese really scary for you. But it's specifically the fear of small holes in things. Glossophobia, fear of public speaking, one of the most common fears. This is not one that I have, actually. I have always been able to get up in front of lots of people and talk. I actually get scared talking one-on-one with people sometimes. Some of you are shuddering just seeing this picture, but trypanophobia, the fear of needles, very common one. Triskaidekaphobia, the fear of the number 13, especially Friday the 13th, and the bad luck associated with it. And if all of these words, these really big words, are making you scared as we speak, oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. I forgot. Coulrophobia, the fear of clowns. I'm one of those people who doesn't like clowns. This has become really common with the movie It. That traumatizes you if you saw it, of clowns. But then if all of these big words are scaring you, you might have hippopotamonstrous quipadellophobia, which is the fear of long words. And whoever named that obviously did not have the fear. Just the diagnosis would panic you. But all of us face fear in our lives. If we try and say that we're not afraid, we're lying to ourselves, because fear shows up in all sorts of different ways. And most of our fears, they might not be diagnosable phobias, but they still can paralyze and lessen our life. One of the most terrifying fears that I see everywhere I go is the fear of failure. Now, guaranteed, through life you are going to fail. But if we believe that failure is the end of the world, then we start to become afraid. And so I've talked to many youth over the years, and I know I did this myself in high school. We figure out what classes we can get A's in, and we avoid classes that we'll struggle in. Because failing, it would be better to avoid taking it altogether than to try and fail at something. And then this becomes a pattern in life. You only do the things that you know you're able to do, because failure would be a horrible thing. But you're not going to succeed at anything without risking failure. And so we make our lives smaller and smaller and smaller, trying to protect ourselves from failing. And the irony is we end up failing by trying to avoid failure. There's the fear of loss of social status. I remember when I was in grade 9, I was dared by my friends to stick my tongue in a light socket. I did it. I burned my tongue. It was horrible. Why did I do it? Even though I knew it was going to be painful? Because the fear of my friends calling me a chicken was more scary to me than the fear of being electrocuted or burned. And there are a number of really embarrassing and stupid things I have done through my life that really came out of this fear of losing social status. But I know in my own life, times where I have avoided things, didn't want to do things, gave up things that I loved because I was afraid of what other people were going to think. And the result of it made smaller and sadder lives. We fear about missing out. I see this all the time as we have devices. And, you know, we've gone on retreats with the youth where everyone had to not bring their devices for an entire weekend. And I remember talking to a youth at a previous church. We were doing a retreat like this, and they actually were shaking on the retreat and crying and saying, my friends could be talking about me right now, and I won't know about it. What's going on? And they were afraid of missing out on something that was happening. So they were staying up all night online, reading Instagram and Facebook in case something happened. And then they were missing out on sleep, and then they couldn't function during their day. And actually, in all of these things, the thing that you fear actually, avoiding this thing that you fear actually causes the thing you're afraid of to happen. Here's a powerful one. Afraid that we aren't worthy of love. One of the things that I think I fear the most, there's actually a name for it. When you're successful, specifically when you're successful and a speaker, you often develop something called imposter syndrome, where you believe that if people knew who you really were, they wouldn't like you. Or that you're just faking it and someday you're going to be caught. And there's this voice in the back of my head that's constantly saying, don't say that, don't do that, don't do that, oh my, you said that wrong. You know, and the critic inside your brain that just screams at you. And when you listen to that critic too long, it paralyzes you from doing things. And it's so effective because you're afraid that if people knew who you really were, they wouldn't really like you. There's the fear that we'll lose those that we love, and this one is really hard. When you love someone so much, the thought of doing without them is so overwhelming, and fear for them can paralyze you. And it's funny because fear can drive you to do the craziest things. I was talking to a number of my youth, and they were telling me, I was dealing with my parents, and I did this thing, and then they started screaming and freaking out at me, and I don't know and I'm like, understand, your parents are scared. This is the reality of every parent I have ever dealt with. Every parent is scared. When you love a child, and you put your whole life into protecting them, the reality that you are not in control is terrifying. And the fear that they're going to do something and it will be your fault and their life will be harmed drives all sorts of behaviors. I worked at a camp, and I had a mom at this camp bring her daughter and drop her off and say, I'm so glad that my daughter's coming to this camp. She really needs a Christian environment to be in. I just need one promise from you before I drop her off. Promise me that she won't talk to any boys this week. And I said, this is a co-ed camp. I can't make, I mean, it's a Baptist camp, so there were like rules about this, but I can't say that she'll never talk to a boy. And she became really agitated and said, no, you have to promise me she's not allowed to talk to any boys. Because when I was 16, I was obsessed with boys, and I got pregnant with her. And I do not want to see her go this same path. And we'll say, oh, well, I will promise you that she will not get pregnant this week. Can we move on from there? Wednesday, kids started coming to their counselors and saying, I think there's someone in the woods. And we said, no, you're just seeing. But more and more kids were like, no, there's someone in the woods spying on us. And so we had to send counselors out to do a patrol. We thought that we had like some kind of criminal out in the woods stalking our camp. And lo and behold, it was this mother who was hiding in the woods with binoculars, spying to make sure that her teenage daughter did not talk to boys. And when we pulled her into the office and confronted her, she said, you wouldn't guarantee me that my daughter wouldn't talk to boys, so I am keeping watch on her. And we said, this is scaring the other kids. She said, well, if you won't make that guarantee, then I am pulling my daughter out of camp. And eventually she actually pulled her daughter out of this camp where she was thriving and enjoying and building good relationships because she was so paralyzed by this fear that her daughter would follow her mistakes. The irony is her daughter told us during the week, my mom is so terrified that I'm going to get around boys. I can't wait until I'm out of her view. I'm going to go find, She is bringing about the thing that she was afraid of by being so afraid that it will happen. And her behaviors trying to protect her child were actually causing the thing that she was, I don't know, I didn't see after that whether it happened or not, but I wouldn't have been surprised. The fear of losing someone actually caused her to lose, at least emotionally, the person that she was fearful of. And all of these fears come back to this, that God isn't good. All of our fears are rooted in this belief that God isn't good, that God can't protect us, that if things happen, it will be all bad. And so we go, God, I can't trust you in my life, so I'm going to take control myself. And as Dr. Phil always used to say, how's that working for you? I do this all the time. I try and take control. I try and believe that if I just do everything right, I can protect myself, and I never can. But here's the good news. I don't have to. Because it comes down to this. 1 John 4:17-19 says, God is love. When we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house, becomes at home and mature in us so that we're free of worry on Judgment Day. Our standing in the world is identical with Christ's. There is no room in love for fear. Well-formed love banishes fear. Since fear is crippling, a fearful life, fear of death, fear of judgment, is not one yet fully formed in love. We, though, are going to love. Love and be loved. First we were loved, now we love. He loved us first. When you know that you are loved, it releases you from fear. I'm always afraid of failure, and I hate doing things that I know I can't succeed in. One of the best things about working at this church is I've been given permission to fail. And guess what? I fail all of the time. Go ask the youth. They will give you alphabetical lists of stupid things I have done over the years. You know, I've worked in situations before where every time I made a mistake, I was pulled up in front of a board that said, "Why did you do this? Why did you do this? Why did..." And so I learned to be scared. The first time an event failed here, I went into a meeting and I was like so terrified to talk about it. And I was talking with Dwayne and he started laughing at me and he said, "Okay, good, you failed. What did you learn from it? What do we do next time?" Here's the amazing thing. As I've lived in a space that allows me to fail, I fail less because I am open and excited. God is not standing there saying, "Why are you screwing up?" God is standing there saying, "I love you. I want what's best for you. Let's walk through this together." And when we understand that that's how God is towards us, it changes things. I grew up learning about God in a way that made me afraid all of the time. If you do the wrong things, God is angry and you will burn in hell. And so I was constantly scared of making choices because God was going to be angry. And then I learned along the way who God really was, that he was a God of love and that I didn't have to be afraid of him. When you understand that, it changes everything. Because yeah, you're going to screw up. I'm going to screw up. We all screw up. And God loves us in the midst of it. The other question is God good? Matthew 6:30-34 talks about this. It's talking about the worries that people have about things in their life. And it says this: "If God gives such attention to the appearance of wildflowers, most of which are never even seen, don't you think he'll attend to you? Take pride in you." I love that. "Do his best for you." What I'm trying to do here is get you to relax, not to be so preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to God's giving. People who don't know God and the way he works fuss over these things, but you know both God and how he works. So steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all of your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now, and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. God will help you deal with whatever hard things come up when the time comes. Now you notice there that God, it does not say, God will protect you from all hard things happening. Doesn't say that. Doesn't say God will protect you, nothing bad will happen. Doesn't say that, but it says God will be with us. God will help us through those times. I don't like that promise. I want the promise that everything will be perfect and I won't have any pain or suffering in my life. That's what I really want. And when God doesn't promise that to me, I try and take back control for God and say, I can do this better. I am going to protect myself from any kind of suffering. And it's that fear that does so much. Fear always leads us down negative paths. A wise man once said this. Oh, sorry. Got ahead of myself there. Our fear that God isn't good leads us to try and take control to make ourselves safe, but safety is a dangerous idol. That was me. I was not saying I'm the wise man. The wise man said this: Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. We see this so much in our world. And we're always good about calling out the fear in other people, but not recognizing ourselves. I saw a version of this that said, fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to voting for Donald Trump. I'm a bred progressive, but let me tell you this, progressives get scared too. Liberals are scared all that. We live as much in fear. We choose to use fear of Republicans in order to get people to give to our causes and do our things. And when we play up fear on either side, it leads to hate of others. And hate leads to us doing stupid things. This is not just conservatives or liberals, Republicans, or whatever you want to call it, whatever divide you want to make. We all live by fear. But God calls us to release that, to not motivate people by fear, but to motivate people by love. I want my youth to know and follow God because God is good and they love him, not because they're afraid of what might happen if they don't. C.S. Lewis said this: there is no safe investment. To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly be broken. If you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully round hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. It will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. The alternative to tragedy, or at least the risk of tragedy, is damnation. The only place outside of heaven where you can be perfectly safe from all the dangers and perturbations of the world of love is hell. When we try and make ourselves safe from pain, when we take vows saying, I'm never going to let someone hurt me again, what we do is actually protect ourselves from love. I remember asking someone out for the first time, and they said no. And it was crushing, absolutely crushing. And I remember saying to myself, I will never love again. But there is no way to move into love without taking a risk on things. Eventually, I had to learn to take that risk again. And you know what? A lot of people said no to me along the way. But eventually, someone said yes. And they were the right person. But what if I had said I'm never going to take that risk again? I would have missed out on the relationship I'm in now. We can't protect ourselves from pain. Because love, being open to love, always makes ourselves open to pain. God doesn't promise to protect us from pain. God himself hurts because he loves us. So what do? Gary Haugen said this: when the calling of God is scary, we lead by remembering that Jesus did not come to make us safe. He came to make us brave. So what do we do to face our fears when fear is all around us? Couple things we can do. Number one, when we face God's fear, we must remember God's goodness. This is so important. I have spiritual amnesia. Every time a new challenge comes in my life, I forget everything that's happened before. And so I'm facing a new situation, and my friends tell me, hey, God has been there for you, he'll be there again. And my brain's like, no, everything's bad, nothing will ever be good again, it's all going to be awful, there's no hope, and I start freaking out. I have a spiritual mentor who I sit down with on a regular basis, and he's really good at calling me on this, and he's saying, Brian, what happened 3 years ago when you were in your job transition? Do you remember telling me that everything was bad and nothing would be good again? Yes. Has anything been good since then? Oh, yeah. In the Old Testament, whenever God did something significant, he would have people build a monument to remind them. When the chosen people went into the promised land for the first time, God parted the waters. They walked across the River Jordan. He had the elders pick up these big rocks from the middle of the river, bring them to the other side, and set them up in a big pile so that when their kids walked by and would go, "Why is there a pile of rocks over there?" They would say, "Remember the time God led us out of the wilderness to where we are now." When we remember the good things that God has done in our past, it helps us move into the scary things of our future. When I remember the places where I failed before, and I fail a lot, but I remember that God was also present through all of those failures. It makes it easier for me to get up and take the risk of failing again. But I have to remind myself. Number 2, challenge the lies behind the fear. When my brain is screaming at me, it says things like this: if I fail at this, it will be horrible, I will be fired, and nothing will ever be good again in my life. And it's not true. Sometimes I have to face, the reality of what I'm afraid of is not based in truth. And so I have to challenge the thoughts that are going through my head. Number 3, dive into love. The more you know you are loved, the safer you are to take risks. It's like when you're terrified as a kid and your parents come and jump in bed with you and put their arms around you, and there might still be a boogeyman under the bed, but your dad is there hugging you, and suddenly it's okay. The flip side of this is when we don't feel secure in love, we get more afraid. I learned this while learning how to drive. Worst driver's lesson I ever had, my dad took me out for the first and almost the last time ever. And I got in the car and I was super nervous because I wanted to impress my dad with my driving skills. And so I started driving and I was so worried about the car coming this way, I didn't look to see if there was a car coming that way, made an unsafe turn, and my dad went, "What are you doing?" And when he got angry, I got scared. And so then I became even more nervous, and because I was so scared, I wasn't paying attention to cars because you can't look for what's happening when you're scared. So then I went through a stop sign, and my dad went, "What are you doing?" And the more scared I got, the more angry he got, and the more angry he got, the more scared I got, and the more scared I got, the more angry he got. This was a bad cycle. We pulled into the driveway after that driving test, and Dad was like, "Never again." And I was like, "Never again." My mom took me out the next day because she knew I needed to do this. And she said, "It's okay." And I was nervous, and I made a mistake. And my mom did the imaginary, slamming on the invisible brake thing. But then she kept a calm voice, and she said, "It's okay, Brian, it's okay. You can do this." Oh, okay. And I did it again. I made another mistake. And she said, "It's okay, Brian, you can do this." And the more that I made those mistakes and was responded to with love, the more it freed me up to stop making mistakes. So the more we dive into and know that God is loving, the more we are released from fear. How do we do that? Most of the times, because it's hard to hear God when you're afraid, we experience this in community. So when we show grace to each other, when we tell each other it's okay even when we make mistakes, that's how we model God's graciousness to other people. Practice things that scare us. This is the hard part. When I went in for therapy, because I said, "This is getting so bad I can't even drive to work anymore. I need to do something." Do you know what my therapist did? He said, "Okay, I want you to write a list of everything that scares you, every bridge that is terrifying of you." And so I wrote a list of it. He said, "Okay, this bridge at the bottom of your list, I want you to go and drive over it. And then when you get to the other side, turn around and go back over it again. Then turn around and go back over again. And drive over that bridge 20 times." It's called systematic desensitization therapy. And I did it until I wasn't scared of that bridge anymore. And I was so proud of myself, and I went back the next week, and I said, I could drive over that bridge. He says, good, now go to the next bridge that scares you. I'm like, I don't like where this is going. But practicing things that scare us in safe environments. Don't just, if you're scared of heights, don't just make yourself go skydiving, especially if without a trained person to do it. Do it in safe environments with people who support you. And you learn by, you do it, and maybe you fail, but you have someone there saying, it's okay, we can still do it. It's the only way to move anything, because the more we avoid what we fear, the more fear controls us, and fear grows rather than going away. And finally this, hold on to heaven. This is where theology is important, because if we do not believe that heaven is real, then fear rules everything. I cannot guarantee that your loved ones will always be there, because we live in a world where people die. But I believe in heaven. I believe that God is good, and I believe that those who I have lost in my life are not lost forever. I believe that this life that we have not now is not the end of all there is, but that one day every tear will be wiped away and there will be nothing to fear, and all those I have lost will be reunited with me, and we will live perfectly in harmony with God for eternity. And so if I die, but that's not the end. If I lose someone, but it is not forever. This belief gives me strength in the greatest of my fears. That loss is not forever, because God is bigger than loss. The Apostle Paul wrote this. He faced terrifying things all of the time. He was regularly thrown in prison. He was beaten. He was shipwrecked. He was taken to Jerusalem, and eventually he was killed for his faith. And in the midst of reflecting on all this, he wrote to Timothy, and he says, if I die, it's gain, because I know I will go to heaven. And if I live, it's gain, because I keep doing ministry. It's a win-win situation for me. And because he believed that in tangible ways, he was able to do incredibly courageous things in ministry. Hold on to heaven. What we experience now is not the end of it. And if the worst happens, it is still never the end. Because God is with us. As the United Church, I think it's the New Catechism says, in life, in death, in life after death, we are not alone. Thanks be to God. Let's pray. Thank you, God, that you love us. You love us perfectly. We do not have to be afraid of you. We do not have to be afraid with you. Help us to let go of our fears, the things that hold us back, the questions, the what-ifs, the voices yelling in the back of our head. May they be overwhelmed by the reality of your love for us. Help us to show grace to each other, to make this a safe place to make mistakes, because we're all going to make them. Help us to know that even in the worst of situations, that the worst is never the end, that your love is always the last word. As we let go of our fears, empower us to love fearlessly, to make a change in this world, to free others from shame and fear.